other folks will join us. We have a lot to cover today, so it's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it. So welcome to everybody, and it's incredible and exciting to be here at the International Research Communications webinar of the Participate program of the Recirculate project and Actuate. And I think for the last couple of weeks, we've been having discussions on the WhatsApp group on different media outlets around the importance of communicating research. I think interestingly, it's a topic and area that everybody's excited about, but also impacts on everybody, especially in the research field. There is no arguing that there exist huge gaps, between academia, research, and industry in many African countries. And it provides a reason for an urgent need to design kind of very, very powerful tools and initiatives that can help increase the impact of research across Africa. And most African researchers know the term. Please, can everybody mute their microphones, please? There's a noise in the background. Thank you. Fantastic. Now, most African researchers know about the term publish or perish, which is used to describe the fact that research in Africa is kind of driven by publish to be promoted, in terms of your professional career, as against, in some case, publish for impact. I mean, and the question is, can both work together? Now, while both bases can function together, I believe, the trouble is that most researchers are not driven by research for impact because there's no kind of compulsion in environment or institutionally to drive that. You would agree with me, in an environment like Africa where many challenges actually exist, it's important for research to kind of think about ways of providing solutions to actual problems and challenges on the continent. I like the term. Academia says we have knowledge, industry says we have money, government says we have power, and maybe civil society says we have rights. And this segment of society operates in bubbles. And one of the issues that actually affects that communication, that pathway, that interaction between them, believe it or not, is actually communication. And I think for me, it's important for us to appreciate the fact that not every researcher understands how to communicate in other ways beyond publishing of papers. And so how can you help researchers? How can we help researchers to think about more creative ways of communicating their work? Because as far as I'm concerned, every researcher has a voice. But the question is, what is the impact or the power of a voice if there is nobody to understand what you're trying to say? And so on that note, we've put together this interesting webinar where we would look through a series of communication pathways and platforms and tools to help and empower researchers, academics, scientists with new methods and new ways of thinking about communicating their work, especially in the era we now live. And so without much further ado, it gives me absolute pleasure to welcome Professor Keksempo, who will give an introduction to the Recirculate/Actuate project that is hosting the webinar today. And who is Kek, you might find? You might ask. He's a professor of environmental biology, microbiology, with over 30 years experience in research. Is understanding fundamental processes that affect organic contaminants/biota interactions in soil. Kek has been awarded several research grants from NERC, BBSRC, EPSRC, and all the SRCs. And including GCRF, which is the actual funding body that actually sponsored Recirculate at the moment. Kek is the current director of Actuate, the project, and also Recirculate. And it gives me absolute pleasure to welcome my boss to give us an introduction into the project. Over to you, Kek.
Well, thank you very much, Akan, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many people on the call. What I'm going to do now is to try and share my screen. Well, when I say try, I am going to share my screen. You said optimistically. Okay, so can people see that? Can you see that?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Oh, very clearly.
I'm going to put it in presentation mode now. Bit of a delay on the computer. Oh, hasn't worked. Hold on, just bear with me a sec. No, I've got the spinning wheel of death now. Can people see that? Can you see that? I can.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, that's great, fabulous. Okay, so well, good morning again, everyone. Apologies for the technical delay there. So yes, my name's Kirk Semple. I'm a professor in the Lancaster Environment Centre. I'm director for the Recirculate and Actuate projects, which are both funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund within the UK, and I'm also heavily involved in international projects, collaborative activities with the university, a lot of which is in sub-Saharan Africa. And obviously, as Akan's already introduced, we're here to talk about research communication, particularly in the international space, and perhaps to at least try to answer the question, how can researchers best communicate with their work, or communicate their work rather. So, I mean, the art of collaboration is crucial to what we try to do, and communication is absolutely central to effective collaboration. And from here, as Akan has already mentioned, we've tried to develop with stakeholder communities links between researchers, private sector, industry, government and policy, and of course civil society as well, which is absent from this diagram, and I do apologise for that, because of course civil society is very important as well. And we try to embody this through the Recirculate and Actuate projects. So what is Recirculate? Its full title is Driving Eco-Innovation in Africa, Capacity Building for a Safe Circular Water Economy, underpinned by the Centre for Global Eco-Innovation here at Lancaster, but also having key partnerships in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Zambia and Botswana. It's a massive project funded to the tune of approximately £7 million over just over a 4-year period. And really, it's a shared vision. It's about supporting new partnership-based approaches to enable African and, of course, UK researchers to grow transformational impact through working with, in and for the communities. It's multi-sectorial. A key component here are small to medium-sized enterprises, as well as research users, policy folks as well, working across many different disciplines in the academic and research community. And of course, it goes without saying that this is a key example of working beyond national borders. This is truly an international collaboration and partnership. And the key thing here is that we are working in an equitable collaborative partnership to address the goals of the Recirculate project. And really, it's underpinned by the notion of a circular economy. Some may describe it as a green economy. Some might describe it as the waste, energy, food nexus, by way of example. But really, this diagram sort of encapsulates the key structures, research structures within it. So thinking about how we can take waste, something that we consider as valueless, add value to it to produce sustainable energy that can be used for the benefits of society. Of course, as with any process, there is waste produced, and the idea here is we don't throw that waste away. We actually use it in agriculture and food production, either as a source of irrigation or indeed a fertilizer, a sustainable fertilizer or soil conditioner, which can then be used to produce food in a more sustainable manner, which of course feeds back into the community element, where this nutritious food is providing significant benefit from the environment. And again, as with the energy production, agriculture produces waste as well, and it's about how we harness that waste and feed it back into the circular economy loop. So what we have here is a situation where we're adding value to waste, we're producing energy in a sustainable manner, we're producing food in a sustainable manner, we're protecting and sustaining soils for that food production, and this is a virtuous cycle. Of course, beyond the sort of elements of waste management, energy production and food security, there are other elements involved in this which are equally important. So there's thinking about how we can develop business opportunities to support and maintain the circular economy, how we can engage with communities, how we can communicate, how we can exchange knowledge, and of course how that can actually feed into policy which can ultimately help to drive the whole circular economy across sub-Saharan Africa, and of course in the UK as well. And really, the Actuate project, which Akan and I have both mentioned, has come out of Recirculate as a project. So, long title: Accelerating the Adoption of Circular Sanitation Demonstration Systems for Improved Health Outcomes. Again, a significant project to the tune of just under £750,000, bringing together partners in Nigeria and Ghana to actually build anaerobic digesters as demonstration projects at a school in Ghana, in Accra, and on a university campus in Benin City at Uniben in Nigeria. And the idea here is to promote the circular economy, and what we're trying to do is about capacity building and in education in terms of generating acceptance, driving change to embrace circular economy, and of course to explore how we might develop new entrepreneurial models for business which maximizes economic benefit locally, regionally and nationally. And so this leads us to today, really, and the introduction that Akan's already gave. We've got some real superstars who are presenting here, and of course the collectively the group will address key objectives under the heading of international research communication. So to highlight the objectives and progress of the UK government's funded projects so far, to explore the challenges and opportunities for effective communication of research in Africa, to celebrate the achievements and successes of different young Africans who have been impacted by the capacity building and communication strategy elements of the projects that we've talked about, and finally to provide an opportunity for further engagement with current and new stakeholders in different African countries for future collaborations, investments and development work. So big objectives, a tall order. There's a lot of pressure on the invitees, the presenters' shoulders to deliver on these objectives, but I'm confident, knowing them all personally, that they will certainly deliver on this. And then finally, I'd just like to thank you all for listening to me introduce this. And if you're interested in the projects more generally, please check out the websites for both the Recirculate and Actuate projects. And on that, I'm going to hand back to Akan to continue with the webinar. And if my computer responds, I'll unshare my screen.
Thank you very much, Keck. Absolutely fantastic. And actually, I mean, he wasn't actually mincing words. We have some superstars in the room. I'm telling you, these guys, we've been looking for them to get them here. It's been an absolute hard work, because they are sought after international speakers and they will do justice to the topic. And interestingly, what we've done as well is try to capture a series of models so that at the end of the webinar, every scientist in the room, every professional, every academic, every researcher has a clear idea that you actually have other communication models and communication tools available to you to communicate your work. And so to start that off, I have the absolute pleasure to invite a good friend of mine, somebody known to the room, known internationally, who will speak about the fundamentals, or if you like, the principles of writing policy briefs. Now, it's very interesting that when you hear the term policy brief, even from the nomenclature, it's supposed to be brief. And indeed, it is brief. But trust me when I tell you, to write a policy brief is probably as difficult, if not more difficult, than writing a full academic paper, because a policy brief is for government folks. But then ultimately, everyone knows government in Africa are in charge of every university, whether you like it or yes. Government in Africa are in charge of every research organization, whether you like it or yes. But the point is, what interaction does research organizations have with government? How can you communicate your work to them? And so to deal with this topic is a gentleman who holds a double PhD. Each time I say that, I shake to it. People are struggling to have one PhD. This dude has got two. A double PhD from University of Nigeria and from University of Reading in the UK. He's currently the executive director of the African Technology Policy Studies Network, ATPS, headquartered in Kenya. Dr. Ozor is a Commonwealth Scholar, Wellcome Trust Award winner. He got the best PhD presenter at University of Reading in 2006. He's the Assistant Research Fellow at the African Climate Change Fellowship Program. He sits on many international boards. I mean, this guy is just endless. And he'll be speaking to us about the fundamentals of policy brief as a communication tool for academics and researchers. Dr. Nicholas Ozor, you've got 10 minutes, sir. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akan. I hope I'm heard. You can hear me?
Yes, very clearly, yes.
And you can also see my presentation. Can you?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Presentation mode, so it can be larger.
Thank you. That's
Excellent.
good.
Thank you for that introduction. And I used to tell you, whenever you introduce me, I start looking sideways to know whether we are two or three, or whether I'm still the one person. So, drawing from the topic that was given to me, I was able to craft this title, Approaches to for Policy Influence, for Effective Policy Influence. And I will share it from the case of a policy brief, which is one of the tools or one of the approaches for influencing policy at different levels. Next slide. So I'll just have these 6 outlines. Briefly, for those who don't know ATPS, tell you about us, provide a background, and tell us what policy brief is all about and its benefits, and what the content of a policy brief should be, and a case example and overall recommendations. Next. So for those who don't know about ATPS, ATPS is the leading policy research think tank in Africa. We have been rated as the top best Africa's science and technology policy think tank. And we are a transdisciplinary network of researchers, policymakers, civil society actors, the private sector actors that promote the generation, the dissemination, the use and mastery of science, technology, and innovation for Africa's sustainable development, for environmental sustainability, and also for global inclusion. We work through national chapters located in 30 countries, 27 in Africa, 3 in the diaspora. Our overall aim is to remove the valued proposition is to remove the constraints, the policy constraints that prevent the adoption of science, technology, and innovation technologies and innovations, products and services, and so on and so forth. So next slide. So I will provide a kind of background on why we need a policy brief and the rationale behind that. And I say that if scientific research, and here I mean policy research, because there's a difference between scientific research and policy research. The methodology or methodologies for achieving these two separate kind of studies are different. So, and that may be a discussion for another day. So when you are setting up a policy research, you are setting up that research methodology with the hope that you will eventually use the outcomes or outputs or findings from this research to inform policy and programmatic actions that solve societal problems. Therefore, influencing policy necessitates that you communicate effectively. And remember, effective communication is a communication that happens when the target end user acts in the direction of in the direction of the sender of the message. So when you tell somebody, for instance, go and get me a pen, if the person moves and gets the pen on the table and gives you, you have communicated effectively because the person has actually done what you asked him to do. So that's you have communicated in the form that he understood and is able to act in that direction. Next slide. So, in terms of influencing policy, to communicate and be able to influence policymakers is a very difficult task that requires specialized training and arts to achieve. And that's specialized training and arts is what we call advocacy, ability to influence these policymakers to act in the direction that you want them to act, using most of the time evidence to do that, which is the prime, which is the ideal. If policymakers use evidence to make decisions that they make. But also, in terms of influencing them, there are specialized ways you can do that. It is not only one method, though I am going to settle for a policy brief as one tool or one approach because of its effectiveness. But then we need to understand that policy making is a very complex process, that it is not just linear. It is highly iterative, and if you plot it, you can get a very diverse scattergram that you will not be able to connect. And I will give you an example in the next slide. So this is the process. I will not overburden you with the process of policy making, which I had already said is complex. We know in a traditional setting, you start with agenda setting to formulating the policy, to decision making, actual decision making, implementation, and then you can monitor and evaluate. But let's see the stakeholders. Next slide. So the stakeholders are various, and I'm happy the previous speakers have mentioned some of these stakeholders. We've talked about the cabinet, the parliament, the ministries, private sector, the civil society, the donors, who also influence decisions at national, regional, or global level. So these actors are part of any policy-making process because it is iterative. Next slide. Because it is iterative, you don't find one person alone getting a policy, next slide, and finishing up with it. Please click as many as you can. So these actors have the right, the power, the mandate to make policies. And for them to make policies, you can see the network is okay. You can end there. You can see that to get one policy, the process with a kind of convening and making it inclusive, to make sure that you hear from the civil society, you hear from the private sector, you hear from the ministry, you hear from the president, you hear from the cabinet, you hear from the parliament, and also the international community and the development partners. You can see what it results in. To the extent that you may get one policy that you kickstart today, and it can take you 5 years before a very simple policy, before it can be gazetted, because of this iterative process you have seen that lead to the development of one policy. Next slide. So, what is a policy brief? Which is one method that we can use to achieve this policy making process. Next slide. So, a policy brief is a short document that presents the findings and recommendations of a policy research project. You see, I've emphasized this issue of policy research because most times the way we set our methodology do not allow us to get at the findings that will be usable by the policymakers. And I call a policy research an applied research geared towards informing and influencing policy decisions based on existing actual societal challenges. And now you are communicating to non-specialized audience. So you cannot come and start intimidating policymakers because you're a soil scientist. You start telling them about kaolinite, montmolilonite, and all those things. Those jargons, they don't care about them. They want solutions to existing problems. And that's why sometimes there is a disconnect between the jargons of the researchers and what exactly the policymakers need from your research to be able, as an evidence, to inform policy. So, policy briefs are one of the most powerful and effective written communication tools in a policy campaign or outreach. It outlines the rationale for a particular policy alternative or course of action in a current policy debate, which is the marketplace for competing policy ideas. Because there are many other ideas in the parliament, in the house, in the cabinet. So yours has to pass the threshold before it can be considered. Next slide, please. So the general guideline for you, apart from setting the methodology right, now you have your research findings. You want to craft out a policy brief from it. This is the general guideline. 1, you have to focus on the target audience. The message needs to be clearly focused on the target audience. So you need to know your audience. So you're not just writing for writing's sake. You need to know who is the consumer of that piece of policy brief that you want to communicate. Are they the ministers? Are they the parliamentarians or lawmakers? So this determines the language you also use. Are you writing to this committee of the parliament, or are you writing for providing input into a bill that can be taken to the parliament? So all this, you need to know your audience. 2, you need to keep it brief. As the name portends, policy brief means you are not translating your 100, 500-page research work. You need to crystallize it just in 2 to 8 pages, depending on the context that you want. So you need to focus on a particular problem. One problem sometimes that researchers have when they are writing policy brief is they try to solve many problem statements or objectives and present it in one policy brief. No, one policy brief talks about one idea that you want. That's why it has to be short and simple. talks about one idea and addresses a particular element of your research. The third one is you talk to your audience. Even though you are writing, that writing style, you need to write it in such a way as if the people that are going to consume that write-up are facing you and they are presenting it to them. So you need to write convincingly so that they will be able to understand you. Next slide. So if we look at the core content now, having equipped ourselves with the rationale, with the methodology of setting out to achieve a policy recommendation that policymakers can use, which means setting your methodology right, and now knowing your audience and keeping it short and all those background information, now you've brought your pen and paper, you want to put down your policy brief. So you consider what we call key messages, rationale or introduction, approach, key findings, result, conclusion, implication, and recommendation. These are the 6 core sections of a policy brief. Next slide. So I'll briefly talk about what should contain in each of those sections. One, under the key messages, you need to identify 3 to 5 bullet points based on the key findings from that your research. These messages must be very short for the policymaker. If that is what he's able to grab before entering the meeting and read the key short messages, then you should be able to inform him on how to defend that particular policy message you want to pass. And you have to write these key messages at last. You don't start with writing these key messages first, even though that is the first thing. So it's just like an abstract in an academic paper. So when you finish the paper, you come back and you crystallize what you think are the key top 3, 5 key messages that a parliamentarian or a policymaker in a haste can just read and capture what you have in mind. So mind your language. Pardon?
3 minutes more, sir.
Okay, thank you. You need a rope on my waist. So avoid technical jargons and concept. I've talked about this because the policymakers do not have time to begin to crack their brains on technical jargons and what it can mean. Next slide, please. So under introduction, it just answers the why question. So it explains the significance and urgency of the issue. It describes the research objective, gives overview of the findings and conclusion, and creates curiosity for the rest of the brief, so that the person reading this short paragraph will be able to almost begin to get very interested. Next slide. Let me rush it. Approaches is just like your methodology. How did you achieve? How did you carry out this research that led to the findings that you are now presenting? So it explains how the study was conducted, relates who conducted the study, describe, and all these things are like one page, not more than that. The methods used and so on and so forth. Next slide. Key findings is another section, or the results section. So this section answers the what. So what did you find out from that your study that is relevant to solve societal problem that should attract the policymakers? So what have you learned from that research? Make content easy to flow. Start by painting a general picture, move from general to specific, and base conclusions on results. Next slide. Its key findings, sometimes it is nice to have an infograph, a chart, a graph that should be not a complicated scattergram, something that is simple to be able to enable the policymaker visualize, like not a scientist that, as you are seeing my screen now, if they tell you that the blue color, which is forest, is bigger than every other color, that is so clear for you. So that kind of simple infograph is better sometimes to integrate, to visualize your finding. Next slide. I have 3 minutes, please. So conclusion. So what does it mean? So finally, under conclusion, you set out what kind of concluding, bringing out the entire findings, telling a story and ending that story in one piece. So you aim to concrete conclusions, express the ideas with strong assertions, ensure ideas are balanced, and if hypothesis was abandoned, you explain why. So just a concise summary of that your study. Next slide is what now is the implications and recommendations. Two different important points. So this answers the so what question here in terms of development relevance. Implications are what could happen. This is what could happen if the policymaker doesn't do this thing you are telling him to do. Look at what will happen if you do not mitigate the carbon emissions. More locusts will come, more of our rivers will dry up, and we will not have water for irrigation or for drinking. So you give implication. And most of the time, when you are citing implications of a research finding, mostly it is useful when advice is not requested. Maybe the policymaker, there's no serious request for that your study, but you want to raise an alarm about an impending danger. So, but recommendations is pure call for action. Call for action means this is what you need to do now for you to achieve ABC. Next slide. I've ended, please. Next slide. So I give an example with a policy brief that we published in 2014. No, please, back. Go back, please. Yes. So in this policy brief, it was aimed to mainstream gender into the National Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy of Kenya, because gender was not well represented in the policy, in the STI policy, which we started convening since 2013, but up to date, that policy has not been gazetted, to take you back to how complicated policy making is. So in this policy brief, we were able to ensure that the issue was topical because gender was not mainstreamed. So we had series of consultations and convenings with relevant stakeholders, and we prepared a policy brief, which currently the government of Kenya has copied and pasted into their current National Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy as part of gender mainstreaming. And this led to us using this policy brief to win an international award as the best policy brief in Africa between 2014 and 2018. Next slide. So overall, there is therefore need to continuously train researchers on how to write a policy brief and use it as an effective tool to influence policy and decision making. Getting these skills does not just come. They need capacity building. Researchers need to be upskilled on how to write this. And what we normally do is when we engage with a particular set of researchers, we work with them to translate some of their research findings into actual policy briefs that they'll be happy with, that they have published. So ATPS has for the last 3 decades been building the capacity of African researchers on how to write policy briefs for effective policy influence, and needs to be engaged more by development partners. At this note, next slide, I will say thank you, Karibu, for listening, and sorry if I exceeded the 3 minutes given to me at last. God bless you.
You have to pay for that, Nicholas. You exceeded by extra 5 minutes.
I told you to tie a rope on my waist so that it will be reminding.
I think that was absolutely exciting, actually. And I think 2 points comes to my mind very quickly. The average professor, I know Keck, for example, if you ask him how many pages is your CV, I think Keck's CV is like 45 pages. Keck, am I correct? So Keck CV is like 45 pages. And I guess the issue is if you ask a researcher to convert a 40-page CV to 2 pages, that on its own is a nightmare. How much more converting, a full research paper into a 1,500-word policy brief? That requires some sense of being brief, just as the name goes. But I'm happy that obviously there's an opportunity to train researchers in how to write policy briefs. And so I guess the next, I'll come on a few issues with Nicholas for some questions later on. But I guess we can move straight to welcoming somebody else to speak about
the Mentimeter.
A separate as easy to engage government folks, those in higher authority. How would you engage or communicate research if you like to local communities? So to deal with this topic, I've got a gentleman whose research lies around the environment and human health, with expertise in molecular microbiology, environmental microbiology. He's particularly interested in non-tuberculosis and mycobacteria and their environmental routes for human exposure. So recently, he's engaged extensively in rural communities, working with social scientists. And so he's currently the co-lead of the water and sanitation work package of the Recirculate project. Professor Roger Pickup will tell us, in his experience, based on his current work and past work, what does it mean communicating research to rural communities? 10 minutes, over to you, Roger.
Yeah, thanks. It'll probably take me 10 minutes to set the stuff up, so I'll try and share this PowerPoint presentation and just make sure that rope's really tightly around my waist.
Yes,
if you can.
Yes. Now I have a longer rope. Absolutely.
So immediately, is that sharing okay?
Yes, it is. We can see clearly. Yes.
I'm multitasking here. I've got 2 screens. So okay, this is where we start. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm standing in for Manoj Roy, who has a huge experience with communicating with communities. And do you know what? For the first time this morning, all my dogs have just started barking. So it's probably because I'm talking. So I'll try to keep them quiet. But essentially, yeah, I've worked as an environmental microbiologist, and a lot of the work I do is in the environment. Quite often, the only kind of living beasts I come across are cows and sheep. Although I have moved much more into looking at welfare of patients, particularly with inflammatory bowel disease. But in all this, we've come into Recirculate, where we are really dealing with communities, and it's been a huge learning curve for me. And I'm enjoying every minute of it, particularly the people I meet and certainly our African collaborators in Nigeria and in Accra. So when I was thought about the communication, I just thought I'd take a slightly different bent on it, because good communication is essential for success in any project. That's what we all know, and we're talking about explain our results to communities, but communication is a little bit more than that. There's more facets to it, and one is the communication of setting up the project with a team, which has been an enormous task between ourselves and CSIR and within Recirculate with Unibend. So that's something I'm going to talk about very briefly. Then there's no point having a project in the community if the community is not engaged with the project. And so that was the kind of second part that we learned, how to engage the community. And then it ends up with communicating the results to the community once we've got those results. So they're kind of 3 facets to what we're looking at. And this, again, as Kirk said earlier, is a tale of 2 projects, Recirculate and Actuate, and again these span Ghana and Nigeria as well. So this is going to be a mixture of experiences from both projects, because I'm part of both. And so setting up the project within the team, it was absolutely fantastic. We've got 2 cultures, we've got different sets of scientists, and initially we'd never met, and so communication is absolute key to starting the project, and that allowed us to build a really good team between Lancaster and CSIR and Ghana, and also I'm not talking about the other work packages, just work package 2. So we can build a team with a common goal, which is looking at the sanitation intervention into sanitation, improving water quality, improving human health. And the many meetings that we've had, and we've just written an abstract about the effect of COVID on the project, is that we've done so much beforehand with meetings that we were in a good place when COVID hit us, that we couldn't travel as much and be quite as involved. So sitting down with our partners around the table and looking what is possible rather than aspirational is a really good thing, because it's great writing a research project, but we might exaggerate our abilities a little bit in the project to get the money, but we need to know what we can really do. And then we can discuss the actuals, because there's so much optimism, particularly when you write a project, and what the reality is and what you can do. And in that, we can also develop new ideas, bring the project on. So communication at this stage is absolutely vital. So a really good example is that Manoj and I went to Accra with the idea that we would be doing 10,000 samples. And by the time we'd negotiated and discussed and looked at the reality, we can do 2,000 samples. That's cost, that's logistics, it's what our teams on the ground can actually take. And don't forget, with each sample, we're doing about 10 analyses, so it's still a lot. So we started high and we got to a compromise, and that was through really good communication. And also you can just see here on the board there, we had this idea, and this comes into the Actuate project, is that was our drawing of, hey, let's make one of these. More communication, proper project funding, good communication. The theory became the reality, and this is now at the Islamic School in Medina Zongo. So this is our anaerobic digester plan, which started as this and ended up as this. So it kind of shows the success of communication and getting the project off the ground. And then we have to really, within that framework, engage the community. And these are things I've kind of learned as we've gone on, is we need to meet the community in the community, not sitting in a desk in Lancaster, talk to them directly and understand the kind of cultures that we're involved in. And obviously our entry is with our Ghana colleagues from CSIR. I can't just walk into the community. That's something you learn. We've got to have a good team around us. Get the community involved. That's really important, and interested. Get their trust, which is really important, and try and get the community to own or be part of the project. Really important. So the communication has to go out to the community. We have to talk to them and avoid telling what they need. And GCRF made this very clear, that we should be looking at the issues that are on the ground, not the issues that we think are significant. Address the real issues, and if we suggest issues, let them consider them, not kind of dictate we're going to do this or we're going to do that. And these are just a couple of pictures. This is us meeting with one of the chiefs in the area that we wanted to work into his palace with his family. We made the presentation to him that the project we wanted the project to go ahead. He gave his approval, which was really fantastic, which gave us the kind of entry into there. And again, and this is talking to some of the leaders in Medina Zongo. So essentially talking to those communities, getting their trust, getting in there to get engagement. And then down at the community level, once we had that permission and once we had that trust, it's talking to the community representatives and members to explore the issues. And in the meetings we've had, we've easily shown that the issues that we think we have are not necessarily their top issues. But by negotiation and discussion, we were able to kind of find common ground and where to work on this project. And also, this is in the Actuate Project. This is the Durbar in October, which was essentially a meeting of many of the kind of hierarchy, the important people in the Medina Zongo area, so that we could actually get them to understand what the project was about. And so through that big meeting, we met the community. We raised an awareness of the positivity of the impacts of circular economy, particularly in Actuate. It was led by Hattoff Foundation, who are collaborators, with CSIR, who are collaborators, Greenad, and the Islamic School as well. And from this, the community leaders pledge their offer of their support towards the sustainability of that anaerobic, green anaerobic digester that we've got in the school as a demonstrator project for Actuate. And these are some of the people who came to that meeting. You can see it's really important to get right across. So we're the leaders, but we're in the local women's groups, we're in the youth groups, and also with the addition of a member of parliament there. So that communication, showing the relevance of that project, is really, really important. And then we come down to communicating results to the community. Yeah, we all publish papers, we get them in journals. They're not particularly accessible. How do we convey what we find? And the project's still ongoing, so we haven't got the final results. How do we convey those results to the community? And this is what we're doing in Babezi, is we're following the water all the way along and taking samples from different points in the homes, from water sachets and storage buckets. So we're doing our microbiology, we're doing the chemistry, we're looking at the drains, we're looking at interventions in there, and that's what we're doing. So our CSIR team are in there, people see us working, they ask us what we're doing, so there's communication there. But we've gone one stage further by recruiting this youth group, who we call our change agents or youth forerunners. You can see the group here. These are collaborators here who are running this. And we've recruited these. I think there are eight girls and 4 boys, and they're part of the project now. So that's a really good communication. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to get community engagement, and we're taking these adolescents as change agents. So we're talking about sanitation and safety plans. And what they do is mirror the researchers. They follow the sampling, they follow the analysis of the water, they gain knowledge of contamination of drinking water. And then here's the key to it. They can then go back and communicate these behavior changes that may be necessary to the community members. Really important. So we're bringing them actually into the core of the project. They're seeing the microbiology, they're seeing the chemistry work, etc. So this is just a really significant example of how we're trying to then bring the results back out into the community. Obviously, where we've recruited them, their parents have got permission. We've got community-based organisations who've done the recruiting. We want to train them to understand the water supply chain and effectively communicate with the community members, and also receive professional training, which might enhance their employability at some time in the future. Age between 13 and 16 at the moment, predominantly girls, and they're poised, hopefully, to make an impact on the community by bringing our results and our recommendations back to the community. And you can see them here at different stages, the kind of introductory before they go out. This is them in the field, and this is the group in the laboratory seeing the chemistry and the microbiology. So they actually get really involved with the whole thing. So in summary, and I'm only a minute over, which is pretty good, and I can feel like I'm tugging away.
It is very good, actually. This is, I can feel it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So communicate is the key to things, and these are things I've learned. Observe and be there. If I hadn't gone out to this, I wouldn't understand this project in the slightest. Suggest, not dictate. So we're bringing the community on board with us to do things that they would want us. Open discussion. You know, if they don't like something, we need to know. There's cultural differences, even within country. There's cultural distances, and most important, listen. You know, if we're not listening, then we're not part of the community ourselves. Engage with the community. And one key thing I learned from many of the community representatives, they want us to return and carry on with these projects, not just dip in, take a load of data, go off and publish and never return. So returning and being part of that community, having them part of the project is a key to everything we do. They're some of our partners for Recirculate and Actuate, and they're our funders. So that's it. Thank you.
Actually, Roger, I was about to pull the rope, but you were just on time. Absolutely fantastic.
I could feel.
As you were speaking here, a few things that really hit home. The fact that we have to go and meet them. You know, this tendency of us sitting down in our high tower and expecting things to happen, but going to meet them, I think that's absolutely fantastic. But then not only that, getting them to trust us. And a good way of doing that is actually get them to own it. Not a perception of ownership. They actually own it. And that's actually, a big deal. But I think for me, the bit that actually got me the most is avoid telling them what they need. I mean, the average, if you like, a researcher who is also an academic, lecturing over 200 students, and you're always telling the students what to do, the chances are you might almost consider community guys or community folks has been one of your students and asking to tell them what to do. But it's different to communicate. You have to calm down and understand what they're trying to say. I think that was fantastic, Roger. So to everybody listening to me, if you have any questions whatsoever, you don't have to wait until the session ends. Just drop your questions in the chat section, okay? Now, I'd like us to have some kind of interaction with ourselves, and that will be through Mentimeter questions. So I'm going to ask 4 different questions, which if you look at the chat section, you'll see a link, okay? So please click on that link, and it should open up a live feed so we can actually see people's responses, just for us to kind of engage with the last 2 speakers. So Nicholas spoke about policy briefs as a way to engage with high-flying government officials. And then Roger spoke about communicating with communities in rural areas to engage them to make research work. And so we'll proceed with asking a few questions. So if you look at the chat section, you'll see a link there. Could you please click on the link? And the questions are these. Alan, are we on?
2 links, I can. There are 2 links. Okay. So there's one for policies and one for
first one. Good.
Yeah.
So click on the first link first, and that is it would open up a page, and there are 2 questions. The first question is, what policy influencing tool or approach do you consider most effective or in influencing policymakers? Just mention one. What tool, what methods, what ideas, how would you engage government officials or policymakers to actually get them to be influenced to take the right decisions for impact? So someone has written policy brief. Are there other 2? I know Nicola spoke about it specifically on policy brief, but if there's anybody in the room that also has an idea of other methods or approaches, please include it in the response, okay? But I think the next question is actually a lot more interesting. And I think it's almost, in some sense, controversial, but I want to hear people's views, okay? So the second question. So we have documentaries, roundtable discussions, that's fantastic. So second question, please. This I think is very interesting. Should every research have a policy implication? Yes or no? It's exciting. Because Nicholas was talking about the fact that it's actually important if a researcher at the point of developing your research idea, that conceptualization of your research idea, is good to understand the policy or potential policy dimensions at the point of developing the idea itself, because then it makes it easy for you to translate the research output into a policy tool. So now I'm asking a question. Do you think every research should have a policy implication? Yes or no? What are my responses?
Peggy, can you please stop sharing your screen? Because if
Peggy, can you stop sharing your screen, please? Peggy? Thank you. So yeah, so the question is, should every research work, every research project, research program have a policy implication? So the yes are winning it, and the no's 3. So can you keep voting, please? And I want to ask, I can understand why the yes would say that is the case. But can somebody who has said no, anybody who has said no, tell us, just let me know, tell us why have you said no? Because I think for me, that's actually more interesting. Why do you think not every research or piece of research should have a policy implication. Is there anybody who said no that I should know about, please? Could you just briefly tell us why? Anybody?
I can. Can I come in?
Is that yes? Please, Ken. Go on. I think you probably said no.
Go on. I do think that a lot of research should or could be linked to policy, of course. Okay. But what about blue skies research?
Interesting.
Which is actually focusing on a particular question or a problem that exists that needs an answer to.
Okay, that makes sense, Kay. Absolutely makes sense. You see, but I think I do agree with you. Not every research should have a policy implication, but I like the fact that there is a lot more attention towards the potential for most researches to have policy dimensions, because that didn't used to be the case. I think it actually caused transformational change in African society. A good deal of should have a consideration of policy implications of their research work, even if not all research should have that policy dimension. Click on the second link for a second set of questions.
I have something
second
to say,
link.
please.
Okay, go on, Prof. Yes, go on.
Yeah, just to buttress the fact that just to say that not all research endeavors will require policy implications. So there are some big scope research or dedicated research that are supposed to solve specific problems for example, industries. And if it meets its objective, it does not really require a policy
dimension. That's a very, very powerful point. So you can imagine a research driven by demand from an industry partner. So that means if you finish the research, you've answered the question by the industry partner, you don't require going to a policy element, except there is some underlying need to cascade that result across other industries. And then maybe there's a potential for it. But ultimately and fundamentally, not all research should have policy implications. Thank you so much, Prof. So second link for second set of questions, please. Second link. Now, the first question in this link is this. It's saying, who do you think the best change makers are? Politicians, community members, and the youth. Oh, I find this exciting. My goodness. So why are people just chosen just a few politicians? Don't you trust them? That's interesting. So the question is, who do you think are the best change makers? Who are the best change makers? Politicians, community members, and the youth. There seems to be a huge preference for community members, but I'm actually surprised to see very little attention to politicians, and I wonder why. I thought they had all the power, don't they? So can somebody who has actually picked a politician in the room tell me why you've chosen politicians as the best change makers? Anybody, please. If you picked politicians and you're in the room, could you just quickly tell the room why you chose politicians, in your view, as the best change makers? Because it's obvious that the community members are the ones winning. And I can probably appreciate why. Because ultimately, if change is to happen, it has to be driven by the people who want the change. That for me is very, very powerful. But how come you've chosen the idea of politicians and it's quite minimal in the choices? Anybody? Anybody?
Yes.
I don't mind chipping in.
Yes, please. Let's go on. Why have you chosen politicians? Yes.
Isn't it a matter of scale? I think if you want to make change at national, regional, international, global scale, then you need politicians to drive those changes. Clearly, at a small scale, it may be another approach.
Okay, I think I like that, Nigel. That's actually a good dimension to view it. So if you are wanting to drive change, yes, go on. Go on.
There used to be one.
Hello, anybody else? So Nigel, I think I agree with you. So it depends on the scale. So at that kind of a wide regional, national scale, it will be difficult to get community members to drive the change that you need. And so, which is where policy comes in very, very adequately. And I think I agree with you. So second question, please. And the second question is, what is the best way to communicate results to a community? Now, this is a range of options here, but let's actually get a feel for the room. What is the best way, in your view, to drive or to communicate research results to a community? Drama and theater, community meetings, TV and radio, leaflets and posters, and others. If you have any other idea, you can list it. Let's go. What, in your view, is the best way to communicate research results to a community? Drama, theater, community meetings, TV and radio, leaflets and posters, or others? Okay. Please keep voting, keep voting. Let's get some more numbers, please, so we have a sense of the room. What is the best way, in your view, to communicate results to a community? Please keep voting, please. So it's obvious to me, community meetings is making wave, and I can probably understand why that is the case. You remember when Nigel, when Roger was speaking, he said, "Go and meet them, go to them, speak to them directly." And in my view, every other avenue listed potentially can happen without them. But how would you have a community meeting without the community? You can probably organize a nice theater and drama and then send it to them. You can probably organize a nice TV, radio interviews or broadcast and then listen to it. You can probably design some leaflets and flyers and posters and send it to them. But I doubt how would you have a community meeting at that level without the community? So what I have to say, it's not as if every other method is not important or cannot be used, but I like to see the fact that the community meetings takes priority and by a mile. So it's good to get a sense of the room. And thank you all so very much for participating in our Mentimeter section. So if you have other questions, please don't forget to post the questions in the chat and we'll pick them up later. Now, let's go a bit more media oriented and creative. So for the second section of the webinar, we want to kind of delve into a new dimension, a new era of communicating research. So we've spoken about policy briefs of government, spoken about community engagement. How about to the public through media platforms? And to address those, we have two amazing, incredible women of timber and caliber, the best at what they do, who would help us address this. I'm speaking about the amazing Ugochi Oluigbo and the incredible Peggy Donkor. Now, Ugochi would go first. Now, who is Ugochi? She's a fellow of the Climate Change Media Partnership, and she's a multi-award winning journalist who's won awards including the UNEP Young Environmental Journalist 2012, 2019 Green Accord Environmental Award winner in Italy, UNFCCC CDM African Radio Contest Award. She's a recipient of the Lagos State Government UNDP Environmental Journalism Award. She's produced and presented a Green Angle, which is actually one of the most popular environmental TV show in Nigeria, and she's been a major anchor at the TVC News. She's been hosted at the BBC World Service environmental radio program on local global warming, and she's done an incredible job in broadcast and journalism. She's a lady of record. As a matter of fact, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Ugochi Oluigbo to kind of give us a sense as to if a researcher wants to produce a research documentary, which sounds quite big to me, what are the fundamental things they should take note of? Over to you, Ugochi. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
There's sound coming from somewhere. And I'll especially say hello to Mrs. Peggy Donkor. There are just about two of us, media persons here. So it's good to see your face, and I respect you, and thank you very much for all the work you do. I'll start by talking about what I do and how it started. I started my show as a radio show. So imagine discussing environmental issues or ecological issues using just sound. It's not easy, but you have to be able to translate research, translate, you know, all of that work into sound that people would love to hear. And that's how I started my work on radio, and I was able to get people to become interested, because you know the environmental issues or agricultural issues, people are not really interested, especially the environment. Nobody cares, or if few people care. At that time in 2010, a lot of people didn't care about the environment. So whatever you were talking about, you know, was your business. So on radio, I was able to use sound to be able to communicate these environmental issues to them. And then I have my slide. I don't know if
yes, Alan, can you share, please?
Just one second, just taking a while.
Just 1 second, just 1 second.
Okay, it takes a while.
Just take a while to, yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go. So just say next slide when you want to move next, yeah? Fantastic.
I was asked to speak on documentaries for scientific research.
That's correct.
I work for Green and Good TV. It is a media organization that discusses environmental issues and basically ecological issues. When I started my show, I would say I also on TV, when I wanted to start the show, we wanted to just have started with just get people to sit down and talk, you know, about these issues. But my boss told me, no, Ugochi, I needed to go out. I needed to be outside. And that's how we took the show outside. And that made it, you know, quite a popular show. And for me being a woman, people see me go to these rugged places, you know, climbing things, touching animals, you know, it really became, you know, interesting for many people. So when they think about me, they don't even remember the news that I read. All they remember is the show that I present. So the next slide, please. Why documentaries? I'll be talking about benefits of a good story, their language, our language, and finally we communicated. So why documentaries? Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, documentaries use images to present ideas, characters, and also sound and events in such powerful methods to spark important conversations, and they keep characters and their stories alive for many generations. So I'm sure we've seen some visuals or some documentaries that were made thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, you know, and then we still see them now. They are an important piece of information that helps us understand the past, you know, and help us talk about the present. For scientists, I know it's a difficult thing for them to understand. You talked about compressing, you know, your research work into 1,500 words. How about compressing it into 30 seconds? And that's about 250 words. We see them now on TikTok. We see it on Reels, you know, using social media. These are really very short documentaries that scientists can even make themselves. They don't really need to pay so much money, you know, to invite filmmakers, you know, to make that documentary. So documentaries, I think, are very vital in telling your story. They paint the picture. What is in your head sometimes, the jargon that you speak, you know, is sometimes for us journalists, which is also difficult for us. I said, you know, I failed maths 2 times. I don't like maths. I don't like science. But because I'm a journalist, I found myself, you know, doing this all over again. I ran away from this in secondary school and in university, but now I'm back to trying to translate, you know, what scientists, those of you in this room, what you do, and trying to, you know, get it out to the audience, to the community, to policymakers, to the industry. That's particularly what I love about Recirculate. Recirculate opened my eyes to that, to connect them and think about not just, you know, promotion, but about business, you know, and the solution that comes, you know, to business and also to the community. The next slide, please. So benefits of a good story. A good story would help increase the audience, make people really see your research. So it doesn't just end up, you know, as piles and piles of papers on your desk or, you know, at the university. It helps increase your audience. It helps access. It gives access to vulnerable community to your research solution. Like we saw earlier the videos of the community. I really love that, you know, bringing communities. I would say, from the Bible said, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. So when he was talking about that, that was what came to mind, you know, going one-on-one and preaching this gospel, preaching your research and telling people, look at what we've come up with is going to help you. So when you're able to communicate that, you're taking it to the communities that need, you know, that desperately need your research. positive perception of science and scientists. You know, a lot of I hear my children and they'll come and say, "Oh, that's the mad scientist," and I'm like, I don't know if your children say that too, the mad scientist. You know, and I said no. I mean, we see scientists sometimes as these guys. They read too much. They work too hard. We don't understand them. They're just on a different level. You know, so, but when you're able to use documentaries to show your work, it gives us this positive perception about science and scientists. We say, oh, they're like us. They can actually talk like us. We can actually understand them because they've come down to let go of their jargon. You know, can they have two languages that they speak? Can they speak to us? We're not saying stop your language. We're not saying, you know, don't be who you are. We're saying just think about us. Think about the fact that we're not like you. Can you speak in another language that we can understand? It also increases the income for scientists. I mean, I know some scientists that don't work for the money, but it helps connect your work to businesses. And of course, if you can patent your business, your idea or your research work, it helps you, it helps your family. And then promotion, which I said 3 times because we know that's the reason why we see a lot of research in the universities, because they need to get promoted. They need to get promoted. So of course it would help you get promotion. But for me, I put it last because it's important. But if your research work doesn't get to those it's meant for, what's the essence of it? If it doesn't bring solution to someone in the village who needs energy or who needs it, what's the use of it? The next slide, please. And then I said their language. So if you can read it to yourself, you say it's really difficult. Even as a journalist, it's difficult to read this. If I have to read this news, this on TV, you know, I'll be the photovoltaic invention uses solar modules to create energy that can power businesses, illuminate homes, and provide water. It also checks overall carbon intensity, reducing greenhouse gases that cause anthropogenic climate change. Oh, that's a lot of work. That's so much to say. That's so much to say. And I read it. I would have to read it over and over to even make sense of it, even as an educated person. So not talk about our policy makers. They don't really have that time to go through this. People have already said that they don't have time to try to make sense of the jargon. So this is their language. We respect the language of science. We love you, we respect your language, but it is not our language. We don't understand it. So I go to the next slide, which is our language. So I changed this and I broke it down and I said, this equipment uses heat from the sun to create energy that solves light and water problems. The technology also helps reduce the number of bad gases, which I described earlier as carbon emissions that contribute to man-made climate change. Anthropogenic is simple, man-made, human-made climate change, you know. And then for us, we speak Pidgin. So if you're able to also break it down to indigenous languages, better. So in this your documentary, you can also say this small thing where they see so if it give you light and water 24/7, you don't need to buy petrol again at all. That's what Mama Nkechi is going to understand, you know. You spoke my language. You spoke what the blogs are. When I read it in the blog, this is what I probably would read. You know, we hear about, you know, Don Jazzy and all of these artists and what they're doing. People connect because that's the language they understand. So if you can also break it down to this language that the bloggers can easily carry, you know, that is the language you understand. And I also said, for me, it's taking my work. Scientists do take their work from the lab to journals. But for me, as a documentary maker, I would like us to take it back from the journals to your lab. Let's see the lab. Let's see how you did this. Let's see the community. We can take it to the community and see, does it actually work? How does it work? You know, that is part of what I'll do. So let's reverse it from the journal back to the lab and also to the community to be able to speak the language. I recently, and someone talked about, you know, taking it to sorry, we had a vote where people said, should it be from community meetings or should it be videos? And I recently was a judge and for a wildlife documentary film festival. And I realized that some of the scientists or from some of the projects I've seen, they actually, when they were done with the documentaries, they took it back to the community to have at the meetings. They showed them the movies. They showed them, look at what you've been a part of. Look at what you did. And it really resonated with them. Even the investigations that were done secretly, they were able to see, oh, we didn't know about this, but look at what is happening in our community and look at what we can do about it. So I think that documentaries help. Also, when you're able to take it to the communities, show it to the community, take it to the policymakers. If you need to, you don't send them the briefs or the big journals, you can even be able to send them short videos, short clips, and it's very easy for you to do. These days, you can make it on your mobile phone. You don't need to employ, big budget producers to make your movie for you. You can do it yourself. The next slide, please. And then I said, finally, the academia, scientists, industry, community, and government have finally met. I would talk about a piece I also did in Lancaster, the lady who's working on harvesting water to understand how much water when it rains, talk about erosion. I also did a story about a scientist in Michael Okpara University, Umudike. He was talking about erosion in the Southeast. I'm sure you know about erosion in the Southeast. He's a soil scientist, but he was able to, I'll show you the picture at the end. He took me, we went to the site of the erosion. He was able to narrate this, and we had children with us who were able, he explained his work to these kids, and they were able to understand it because he spoke a different language entirely. And I also made a movie out of this, and we shared it. So it really made such great impact to showcase his work in a different language, in a different language. So I said, word of mouth, go to the communities, go with your camera. It's not that difficult anymore. Do short videos, hold your camera and just film and talk about your work in an easy language. If it's hard for you, you can send to us and we help you break it down. We can speak together and break it down and then help you make your short videos. The next slide. I'm almost done. And then Akan shared something and asked us to speak our languages, go with the flow. Different languages, but we all understood because we knew, okay, this is what this is all about. So they spoke different languages, but we understood what it was all about. We sent our pictures in different languages. And it's funny, as you mentioned, that there are some languages that are the same language, but different dialects. So that's it. Things can be lost in translation, in communication, but we need the scientists to help us break it down. We can decide to translate it in our own words, and we lose it. We lose the essence. We don't even understand what we are translating. But with the help of the scientists, we can be able to break it down, speak in your own language. We can all go with the flow, and be able to communicate your research work. Documentaries are not very difficult. And also part of the judging, we didn't judge the documentaries by the quality, just by the quality. We judged the documentaries by the impact, the story. What is it all about? So quality is good if you can afford it. We don't want to give you the headache of also looking for funding for your documentaries, but you can do it yourself. You can just get a good phone or have someone who has a good phone and film your documentaries and then edit them. There are several softwares for you to be able to edit your documentaries, your short documentaries. There are some of them are really free. But I also say, it's difficult to ask the researcher, oh, you're done with your research. Now you have to write a journal. Now you have to publish it. Now you have to make a documentary. It's a lot of work. But if that is what you have to do, we can also add it to part of what you have to do. So when you're thinking about your research, you also think about how do I communicate my research using documentaries, using short films, going on TikTok, going on Instagram, and doing it the best way that can reach people. And I think this is the end of my slide. And I said, the next slide, that is Professor Sawalam, the soil scientist. And that's, if you can look behind you, see the erosion sites there in southeast of Nigeria. So I think that's all I have for you.
Thank you
my
very
work.
Much. I think that's
I'm glad to share some of my things. I can share links of my work. I'm trying to stay within the time, show links of my work, but I've been able in my own way to help people make environmental journalism interesting or make environmental shows interesting in Nigeria. Thank you very much. And
thank you so very much. That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. And I'm sure people will have a few questions and we'll come back to this later on. I think we just move on to the next presenter, and she's the penultimate one. So to be honest, if you mention broadcasting in Ghana and you haven't mentioned this lady, I don't think you've ever been in Ghana or you've lived in Ghana. I mean, she's not even I mean Peggy Donkor is a multi-award-winning broadcaster. She's a senior manager, producer, director at the Ghana Broadcasting Service. She's been in the industry for over 23 years. and she's done documentaries and presentations and pieces that kind of covers all topics from special interest in women and children, developmental and human interest stories, and a specialism in documentaries and all subject matters. But today, she'll be speaking to us about how do you communicate research through creative media, but focusing on broadcasting as a case in point. May I welcome Mrs. Peggy Donkor, please. Over to you, Peggy.
Thank you, Akan. Thank you. I would need you to help me share my slides.
The slides. Yes, we'll do that.
Okay, I think that my senior colleague, let me call her senior colleague, she's done so well, and I'm just going to add on a little to what she's done. So if you could give me the first slide. Let's see.
Fantastic.
I can't see that. And it's interesting way that we're using the same color, Peggy.
Peggy,
that's a sign of.
Yes, we can see. We can see.
So
if you click on the icon up at the top, where it looks like a projection screen.
Yeah.
If you click on that.
So basically, yeah. So what we are saying is, oops, a moment. Oh, yeah. So what? Oops. Oh, sorry, Ghana. Damn it. Allah. Okay, so research is all. Hello. Oosh.
Go on, Peggy. Go on, Peggy.
Yeah. So simply put, what I am trying to say is that research is all about development, and there can be no development without research. And it's a known fact that Africa has the best when it comes to scientists. But the problem is how to communicate this via television. A number of reasons have been given or mentioned for these, and among them is the relationship between the media, especially broadcast media, and research. More often we find out that it's difficult for researchers to communicate what they have. So I want to use the CSIR as a case study for communicating Recirculate. First of all, researchers must go beyond the usual newspaper stories, press conferences, and news releases, and then get down to the bottom of explaining the issues to journalists. It's common knowledge that most media people stay away from research findings because we think that they are difficult to understand. But I believe, or it is a known fact, that if the researchers will get the journalists involved, interested first, by motivating journalists to understand particular issues. If we use a case like water and sanitation and all that, and then get them to understand, take them through training. The truth is that most of us don't understand. Like my colleague said, we don't understand all your jargon. So we need the researchers to build our capacities. When they build our capacities in these areas, establish and maintain trust and mutual understanding. What CSIR did was to get me involved in everything that they did, especially on Recirculate. We created a platform. We went beyond the formal to informal relationships and meetings. And then now, anytime CSIR has a problem or a program or an issue, a research finding,
they get me involved right from the onset. Journalists or broadcast media should not be, the bitter truth is that we also, this research comes with some funding. So researchers should be ready to pump money into training journalists, which is the bitter truth. If you don't invest in journalists, they will not know what you have for them, and they will not be able to communicate what you have well. Strangely, we find ourselves in an audiovisual generation. People will not really want to read, but they would love to listen or watch. I settled on documentaries, talk shows, drama, advertisements, panel discussions, and with phone-in for television. Why did CSIR choose GBC? When researchers want to use television, you have to look for television stations that has a nationwide coverage. And when you come to Ghana, GBC covers the whole of the country. So that if you have a research finding, when you get GBC or GTV involved, then you know that you are going to cover a wide range of people across the country. What did Recirculate set out to do with the documentary? They tried to solve 3 problems: sanitation, health, and agric. So what did they do? CSIR from the onset decided for us to get the right, I think I have a little challenge with my machine, but going on. They brought in all the stakeholders, the scientists, the social scientists, agric extension officers, agronomists, and the farmers. So we have all the 3 groups in the documentary to explain exactly what they set out to do. Then again, community participation. That is where Madina Zongo and Begbeise came in. Then we had the social scientists first entering into the communities. As they did, all you are there as a communicator with your camera or with your team to try to come up with a documentary. When we look at the agric bits, we went onto the farms to look at the various stages. So for a documentary, you should ensure that you focus on the main angles of the situation: the good, the bad, and the ugly. You have to touch on one problem after the other. That is how your documentary should be handled. Your documentary should be tailored towards human interest. That is only when you will get people to get interested in what you are creating to create the necessary impact. Then again, language. Of course, English is the common language we use in Ghana, but we have other languages. CSIR ensured that they used English, but at the end of the day, they went ahead to translate, or they decided to translate the English into the languages that farmers understood. This time they went to the central region. So central region, they use Chi. So depending on your target group, make sure that the language you are using is the language that your target audience would understand. Also ensure that as a researcher, you take out the jargons. That one everybody has mentioned already. Make sure that the language, even if it is English, in broadcasting, we are told to use simple languages that even a grade 9 people can understand. So what are you communicating? Who are your target audience? Are you looking at adults, farmers, or students? When you are talking about sanitation, you want to talk to primary pupils as well. So choose your language very well and very carefully. We can also use advertisements, but remember that research findings are deep. So we don't normally encourage adverts. But if you want to use adverts on television, we suggest you use the squeeze back form of adverts. Television viewers have a habit of visiting the washroom or doing other quick activities during a breaking program. This is usually the time that advertisements are played. Companies invest, or researchers invest, a lot of money to have services and products aired on television with the aim of reaching as many viewers as possible. However, a survey on viewing habits indicate that these ads played during breaks are not necessarily reaching the target audience or viewers, as most of them will not be behind their television sets. So we would advise, when you use the squeeze back kind of advert, which is normally on the television set, as they watch the program, as they listen, then they have an idea of what your research is communicating. You can also use panel discussions for your research findings. Why panel discussions? Here you can bring on board all the stakeholders and allow your viewers or listeners to phone in to seek for clarifications. Then we have drama. Drama on television. Drama has been identified as one of the tools researchers can use to drum home research findings. In opting to use drama, depending on your budget, like she earlier on, you sometimes have to bring in or use popular TV actors and actresses. They are very popular, and once they are seen on TV, people get or try to sit down to listen to what they are saying. They have become opinion leaders. So in making use of these people, I think that we will drum home our research findings. Make sure that whoever you put on TV to sell your idea is someone who is known and loved by the community or the audience. We can use animations and cartoons as well, depending on what you are doing. The good thing is that now we can use social media. You have your mobile phones, whatever. You don't necessarily have to have long documentaries, as my sister was trying to say. On the move, as you go on the move, you can be watching on your tablets or even your phones. Animations and cartoons also play a major role in drumming home or explaining research findings. This makes it easy to understand. Apart from putting them on television, like I said, you can put them on the internet where people get them on the go, watch as you go system. Then one other important angle of research is time slots. Who are your target audience? What times do they watch television? We know that in Ghana or even in Africa, the early mornings are for political discussions. You cannot churn out a documentary and decide that early mornings where people are on the move, trying to go out, trying to go to work or beat the traffic, then you put your documentaries there. No, that will not sell. It is for the researchers to find out who their target audience is and ensure that they get a good slot for whatever they have. Now, I think that this is what I have. I'm open for questions and any other discussions. So it is about drama, television, docudrama, and all that. The questions will do the trick more than the presentation, because that is when you get to explain more. So in the nutshell, when you want to use a documentary, ensure that you have all the stakeholders. We want to see. Television is visuals. You cannot be talking about water and then you give us farmlands. When you're talking about farmlands, ensure that we have the right sort of things you want us to see. Are you talking about rice farms? Are you talking about tomato farms? Let's see exactly what you want to communicate. But the best is for the researcher to they're interested in whatever findings they have. Create that rapport, relationship, move from the formal, get to the informal. In Ghana, we have what we call the Journalist of the Year Award, or the Ghana Journalists Association Awards, which is an annual thing. What most organizations, especially the big multinationals, have done is to sponsor some of the awards. So if you're a research institution and you think that you want to promote whatever your research findings are, if you sponsor some of these awards, you get journalists interested in your research, and explaining or putting them on television will be very, very easy to go. On that note, I say thank you for the opportunity.
That was phenomenal. That's absolutely fantastic. Actually, there are many things I didn't know about broadcasting you just explained. I think what I find even exciting is the fact that is that big question, or two questions really in my mind. When last did a researcher at the point of developing a proposal include, if you like, a journalist engagement while they're developing the proposal? Most of the time what you find is a broadcasting station or radio journalist is contacted at the end of the result. But you are saying it's important to actually engage them earlier enough from at the point of conceptualization about the proposal in the first place. And secondly, funding. So when last the researcher think about communicating via broadcasting as a line item on their research proposal, because ultimately you want to promote and communicate your findings. I find that very, very exciting. Yeah. Now we have the last speaker who would talk to us about something very interesting. Okay, and I say interesting because it's actually a very a most recent communication pathway that is becoming globally important and relevant. And I'm talking about blogs. Okay, so now I have to speak on this, a very interesting gentleman. He has a BSc from Reading University in the UK and a PhD from Lancaster. He's worked in university research, in teaching and management for over 40 years. And his research provides new understandings in fundamental plant science that finds application in sustainable crop production. He's worked with industry partners, with government partners. He was the first Recirculate director, and then he has now moved on to become the editor-in-chief of the Flow publication of the Recirculate project. And I'm talking of no other than Professor Nigel Paul, who will give us some remarks and some thoughts around the idea of writing blogs as a communication tool for research output. And after his talk, we will have a Mentimeter session, and then we will now go on to the official award ceremony of the blog prize, which he also convened. Over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Akan. I feel I'm letting everybody down now because I haven't got a PowerPoint.
No, you don't need a PowerPoint, just some thoughts will do.
But that wasn't just me being lazy. It just struck me that I would be the last speaker. And actually, I think, as I expected, a lot of what I would say about the flow actually picks up exactly what the other speakers have talked about with different types of communication. So as you said, Akan, my remit today is to talk about blogs and to talk about our experience with the flow as the blogs for Recirculate and Actuate. But actually, what I'm going to say is very similar to what the other speakers have already said. So I'm actually going to consult my notes on what other people have said. And I hope my colleagues don't feel I'm plagiarizing what they've already said. But I think it's interesting that the messages are the same. So let's think right back to what Nicholas said. So what was his first point on his slide? It was focus on your target audience. And I think Peggy and Ugochi have said exactly the same thing. And I think that's really important for any of us thinking about blogs. It's certainly been very important for the flow. Who do you want to communicate to? And for a project like Recirculate, for any research, the other reason, I think it's consistent with what Peggy and Ugochi have said, and Nicholas, why? Why do you want to communicate. If it's a policy brief, there is a clear focus. But otherwise, you have to think about why. I think it was very interesting that Ugochi talked about presenting the human side of scientists, the human side of science. I know Kirk has talked about the flow blogs, making Recirculate a lot richer. People perhaps getting a better understanding of what research, what we're all about as human beings as well as researchers. So I think that's your first question, the why, but also the who. So who do we want to talk to in a blog? I think that has to be a really fundamental question. I think our experience for the blog is that there are two audiences. And one clearly is the wider community. Kirk used our research with, in, and for the community. And that's been important for Recirculate right from the very beginning. And if we're going to do research with, in, and for the community, we have to communicate beyond just our narrow academic audience. So there's a wider community, but I think, and this perhaps emerged from some of what Roger said, sometimes blogs can be useful to communicate to others within a complicated project like Recirculate. So Recirculate has many partners. It straddles many disciplines. It straddles researchers and research users. And sometimes, even within the project, we don't know what everybody else is doing or perhaps understand. That phrase that's been used about jargon, you know, social scientists use a different language from me or from a soil scientist or from an engineer. I think communicating just within the project can be really important as well. So I think when we first thought about the flow, I think those were key questions. Why do we want to do it and who were we going to communicate to? But then you really do come on to the mechanisms of it. And again, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to draw on what others have said. So Nicholas's second point was keep it brief and focused. Ugochi and Peggy have talked about the need to distill your message into a much more concise way than most academics are used to. Typical paper is going to be what? 6,500, 7,000 words?
Words, that's right.
Typical Recirculate blog is 1,000. In many other contexts, that's way too long.
That's a lot.
So that distillation step is really important. Focus and concise. But I think one issue, you know, if you said, I've been in this business for 40 years, and in most of those 40 years, what have we trained younger scientists or younger researchers to do? We've trained them to write papers. We've trained them to give posters and academic conferences. Nobody's ever trained anyone until very recently to do what we're talking about today. And Nicholas talked about the need for training, the need for capacity building. And I think that's another really important aspect of opportunities, if you like the flow or the blogs. It's a means by which everyone can practice, can have a go. And I think before you get into thinking about policy briefs or some of the broadcast media that Peggy and Ugochi have talked about, just giving all of us within Recirculate the opportunity to communicate in a different way is really valuable. And I know as editor, people being concise and focused and not trying to cover the whole of a 3-year project in one thing, you know, those lessons are very transferable. How's my time going? Where's your rope, Hakan? So what was the third thing? Nicholas, it's you again. I'm sorry, but your third bit was talk to your audience. And that's exactly what Ugochi and Peggy have talked about. And that's exactly what it is, you know, for a blog. It's what we said, who you're talking about and understanding how you do that. And different audiences perhaps will need different approaches. That's about storytelling, perhaps. So I'm looking at my notes here. It's sometimes about the human side. But the other word which everybody's used this morning, which is so important, and I really liked how Nicholas put it, he started by saying, mind your language.
Language.
Peggy and Ugochi have talked about, you know, we love jargon, whatever the research is, but, you know, no, don't do it. Just getting used to explaining your ideas without using. I have a colleague who can never write anything without using the phrase, what's the word? Autochthonos. It's got more vowels in than any word has any right to have, but it just means sort of stuff that's produced within a water body. So just getting away from the jargon is so important. I think those lessons have come from Recirculate blogs, from the flow. I think they've come from everything that people have said this morning. So if Akan will excuse me, and if the previous speakers will excuse me, perhaps I can capture our experience in the flow in the same language that the other speakers have talked about. Know and focus on your target audience. Keep it focused and keep it targeted and keep it concise. Then talk to your audience, know your audience, talk to your audience in a language that makes sense to them. I think that's what we tried to do with the blog. You might come back to it as we think about the competition. But for me, I think any of the speakers this morning perhaps would have come up with exactly those same headlines. So what we do with blogs, I think, are transferable and translatable into all the other forms of media we talk about. Is that okay? I can whip up a quick PowerPoint if anybody wants one.
No, we don't want the PowerPoint, Nigel. But to be honest, I couldn't have done a summary that good. It is absolutely spot on. And I think you made a really good point. I think it's that thing about trial. It might sound so external to you as a researcher scientist, but if you don't try it, how would you know? Trial. And ultimately, the more you write it, the better you get. It's about trial. I mean, ultimately, I'm sure every scientist's first paper wasn't fantastic. It took some time. I mean, your supervisor might have told you, what have you done? My goodness. But then you made it better. Now, there are academics who produce papers by just closing their eyes. That's because you've done it a lot of times. In the same vein, these new ideas and communication methods of policy briefs and writing medias and blogs can be started. But I guess the point is, can researchers understand why it's important to understand or to know other models of communication? So I want to move straight to the last set of questions, just to engage everybody, because I think we've had a really fascinating session today. Then after this engagement through a few questions, I will hand over to Nigel to give us a very good summary of the Flows blog prize. You remember that there was an advertisement for individuals to submit a blog with specific to about 150 to 250 words. And we've gone to the judging, the judgment has been happened now, and we have a winner. Nigel will talk about that. But first, can you look at your chat section for quick questions that I want people to respond to very quickly, please? Click on the link on the chat, and I would love everyone to kind of participate on these, so we can get a sense as to engagement with the audience. So we've got a series of questions that kind of focuses on the different speakers, the last 3 speakers. And the first question is this: do you think journalists or communicators give the microphone to African researchers as much as they do their foreign counterparts? Yes or no? Do you think journalists give more audience, the microphone, to African researchers as much as they do or they would do to their international or foreign counterpart? Yes or no, please? This question, I guess the sense of the question is to understand the fact that you need to understand local context when communication. So I think, so please keep voting. Do you think journalists and communicators give the microphone to African researchers as much as they do their foreign counterparts? Please keep voting. Okay, I think it seems like the room is divided. which is good to see. So I guess you will view this from it's depending on who is responding to the question. So and maybe people's perspective with respect to the idea of collaboration in communicating research. So I think as it stands, the nays of one, and there must be a reason why. But because of time, I'd like us to move straight to the next question, if we may, please. And it's a very interesting one. It's a yes or no question, but let me get a feel for the room. So should scientists publish their research in 2 languages? One for their world, the scientific world, filled with all the jargons, and one for the rest of us? It's a very powerful question. Do you think the average scientist or every scientist should think about publishing their research in 2 languages? So most of today, if you notice, we focus on the other languages that are not research papers. There are policy briefs, there are blogs, through broadcasting, to writing documentaries. These are other languages that are not research papers. So the question is, should scientists publish their research in 2 languages? Keep doing papers, but then consider these other languages. And as it sounds, or it seems, everybody except for one, I wonder who the person is. Everybody has a preference, or that scientists should think about other languages to publish their work. And I think it's actually the essence. I mean, I'm sure the person who said no has a reason why, and maybe justifiably so. But I guess in general, we have an idea that it is good for scientists and researchers to consider other ways of communicating their research work. Third question, click on the next link, okay? So then the question is this: what do you think prevents researchers? This is very important, please. What do you think prevents researchers from partnering with journalists to promote their work? What is the real reason? Lack of time? There's a strict focus on research paper publications. Lack of contact? Maybe they don't know any journalists, or lack of funding to engage journalists. That's very interesting. What do you think prevents researchers from partnering with journalists or media bodies or media partners to promote their work? Lack of time, that's also true. Strict focus on research papers. Lack of contacts. It's interesting to note that lack of contact is nobody saying that as a reason yet. And I think that's true, because you maybe don't even need contacts with a journalist. You have access to Twitter. You have access to Facebook. You have access to your own ways of communication. And so lack of funding, but it seems to me that the biggest choice, or if you like, reason by the room, is the lack or the strict focus on research papers. And I think that makes sense. It's not like researchers wouldn't love the idea of writing a blog or tweeting a result, or if you like, producing a documentary. But if there is super focus and strict focus on research papers, it prevents them from communicating their work or thinking about it, communicating their work in other dimensions. And so that's very interesting to see. So it means everyone listening to me, if you're a researcher, an academic, it's a good time to think about other ways of communicating your work. Next question. Next question. Thank you for that. What do they think? What do you think is affecting the use of television? So this is an answer. So if you have any idea, just write it in the response. What do you think is affecting the use of television to disseminate research findings? Why do you think it's affected? You find lots of very interesting entertainment programs on TV, news programs on TV, reality TV shows is happening a lot now. But how come research dissemination is not popular, as it were, on TV stations? And why? What do you think is affecting that use? Anybody? Any ideas? Any ideas? What do you think is affecting the use of television? So some good responses here. Access, that's actually very true. It's too expensive. I think that's also very true. I mean, you can imagine to broadcast or to put together a broadcasting program on Ghana TV. Peggy, I'm sure it's not very cheap. I'm sure she's actually nodding her head to agree with me. So that's very true. Lack of interest, that's also very true. Lack of funding, accessibility. There is the issue around it's too expensive, the cost of TV, lack of, okay, so I think in summary, the key point is the fact that this is very expensive, lack of access, and it does not grab the audience. Lack of interest, lack of funding. Thank you very, very much. That's absolutely very powerful. And I think I can see the reason why. But I guess in some sense, if you still want to do it, because TV has a potential for massive reach, like Peggy was saying. So even though it's expensive, if you incorporate TV within the contract or within the dimensions of your budgeting at the point of putting together a funding proposal, then it makes it easy. But you have to understand why it's important. Next question, please. Don't worry, just 2 more questions and we'll be done. 2 more questions, that's it, 2 more questions. What do you think has worked best or would work best in the blogs of the flow or in research blogs generally? What do you think is the most important element of an amazing blog? Conciseness, author's personality and views, lack of technical jargons, expression of research application, or evidence of partner collaboration? What do you think has worked best, or what do you think will work best to get the best blog? What is the most important thing to you as a listener or a reader? If you open a blog and you want to read a blog, what would turn you off totally? What is the most important thing to you? Is it conciseness of the blog, the author's personality and views, the lack of technical jargons, expression of research applications, or the evidence of partner collaboration? Nigel, are you seeing this?
Yeah, I'm seeing it. It's good stuff. I think, again, it's picking up those messages that Nicholas and Peggy and Ugochi have all said. Be concise and don't use the jargon.
Yeah, so it almost feels like actually those two are the ones topping the choices. The conciseness, lack of jargons. Conciseness and lack of jargons, because I mean, the world is getting busier every day. People don't have time. People want to read stuff on the go. Whether it's a policy brief, I mean, Ugochi was talking about the fact that I was even thinking that for a researcher to kind of reduce a 7,000 word paper to a 1,000 word blog is an issue. She's saying, how about a 1 minute documentary? Now, can you imagine? That's even more difficult in a sense. How can you capture all of that in 1 minute? But guess what? The room has had it. Conciseness, lack of jargon has stopped the day. So if you forget anything, remember those. Last question. Last question. I think it's very, very powerful. Very, very powerful to say. Final question says, why do you think only a few people, whether researchers or research users, come forward to write blogs? So you know blogs are quite straightforward. It's just 1,000 words. I mean, you write 10,000 words like this. It's easy. But how come it's difficult to write 1,000 words? What is the reason why you don't come forward to write blogs? So let's say the reasons. So the time to write blogs, confidentiality reasons, lack of training or experience to write formal blogs, or lack of training or experience to write non-technical pieces. Nigel, can you imagine what we're saying? This is incredible. That is so good to see. So time is one thing. That's interesting.
It is. I'd be interested. There's only 6 people. What does everybody else think? Oh, isn't everyone?
Please, no, so actually, this I think is very important. So please keep voting. There are 60 persons or more in the room. Let's get some more votes, because I want to know the reason. Why? What is the main reason? And then maybe if you have a better idea, maybe we can think about, if you like, targeting the structuring of the blogs differently, just to help others out. So keep going, please. Keep voting, please. Please keep voting. Just click on the link in the chat section let's have some more votes in, and then we'll wrap this up. Okay?
Does that mean the other 50 people in the room are all happy to do blogs? Can I email you all and put the finger on it then?
I think so.
Because you're not giving me a reason why you can't.
So why are you not writing blogs?
Yeah.
Time. So I think please keep voting, please. Okay, I think the votes are increasing now. That's good. Please, if you're in the room, please try and vote on this one because we want to know, so we can maybe think about better ways of engaging you to write some blogs, because we do need scientists and researchers to write more blogs, and the flow provides a really good opportunity for that to happen. So I think the last point is taking the preference, the lack of experience to write non-technical pieces is stopping that. I think that's very understandable. And it goes back to what you were saying, Nigel.
Again, pick up what Nicholas said right at the beginning, that we need capacity building in communications, just like this.
Yeah, that's very, very powerful to say. Okay, and that's all, folks, for the webinar today. But then before you go, we have just about 5 to 7 minutes to do a very quick ceremony to announce the winner of the Flow Blog Prize that was carried out. And I'm going to just call on Nigel to give us a sense as to the application, a few thoughts on that, and then let's announce the winner. Over to you, Nigel.
Thanks, Akan. It is really interesting just picking up what we've looked at just now, because one of the reasons for doing the competition was to give people an opportunity to practice and to hear a wider range of voices. We talked a lot about researchers communicating, but Recirculate's not just about researchers, it's about research users, it's about the community. And we hope that everyone within the Recirculate family would feel comfortable in sharing their thoughts through something like a blog. Maybe now we know one reason why people find that difficult. But that's why we did it. I'd like to thank everybody who offered a blog. We had some excellent entries from across the whole range of the Recirculate family, from researchers and from, if you like, communication professionals. As Peggy knows, as one of the judges, it was a very hard task to actually select a winner. Not everyone can win, clearly. I will contact everybody who submitted a blog with some feedback, and maybe that will address that issue of training a little bit that we've just talked about. I think one of the things that came across, we actually asked people to write 150 to 250 words. So actually shorter than most of the blogs in the flow. And as we've just seen, that is really difficult to distill things down to such a few words. I think most of the entries managed to do that. Most of you managed to use the language. I think that the style was interesting. Some people use quite a dry, formal academic style, but without getting bogged down in the jargon. Some people were quite, I think creative writing is probably the right way to describe it. Some of them were really sort of beautifully written pieces. And I think what we were looking for was perhaps a balance between those, something that was accessible and interesting, but still conveyed the message. And that idea of a story, which has emerged several times in the course of the meeting. So I'm going to end by referring to a winner, but I'd also like to acknowledge what do you call this? Highly commended. I'm not quite sure the right word.
Yes,
we
that's
thought
a good way to put it.
we're very
highly
close.
Commendable. Yes,
we're very close to the winners. So that's quite interesting. So I'd like to mention, in terms of their excellent blogs, both Otapili, Mary and Wales, as researchers who wrote excellent blogs, and I really appreciate that, and I hope we can see them published on the flow.
Can everybody clap for them, please? So Wales, Mary, Otapili, your blogs were fantastic. Please, can we get some claps? Can you unmute yourself and do some clapping, please? Fantastic. Okay, the winner, Nigel.
No, there were more highly commended.
Okay, go on,
I think it's interesting that who am I looking at? That Winifred and Ugochi both wrote excellent blogs. coming from perhaps a more communication marketing type of background, which was quite different. So I think we should give them a round of applause as well.
Applause. So Winifred, I think that's fantastic. They were actually fantastic as well. Highly commendable. Thanks, guys. It's really powerful. Okay.
Now I have to build the tension. That's the role, isn't it? I have to start pausing.
It's building up to the
what
winner.
they do on the telly. I'll ask you.
It's building up.
Okay. So before I give you the name, I'm going to tell you why this person ended up as the winner. And I think there was finally a close consensus from all the judges that this was the outstanding of all the blogs. And I think it was the combination of conciseness and telling a clear story in a very engaging way, in a way that would draw a reader in and yet still leave the reader with a really important message about communication. Actually, I've realized you've seen some of that story already this morning, because the winner has actually spoken this morning and used some of the material from her blog in communicating to you this morning. And the winner is that what you have to do? You have to say.
No, so we have to drum. Everybody, hit the drum.
Drum
beat. Drum beat.
The winner is.
Drum beat. Everybody, drum beat.
All right, he is Ugochi. Congratulations, Ugochi. Absolutely
fantastic. So Ugochi Oluigbo is the winner of the first Flow Blog Prize. And Ugochi, is it okay if I call you to just give some what you would call acceptance remarks, like you are the Oscars, please?
Okay. I wish to thank my supervisor. I wish to thank the scientists who I worked with. And thank you so much, Nigel. Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Aken. Thank you, everyone. For the opportunity. I enjoyed writing that, and I enjoyed that it was pretty short. So yes, I look forward to writing more, and I look forward to supporting scientists who would want me to help them out in maybe writing a piece or filming something. I'm grateful for this award. Thank you so much, and I hope to inspire a generation of science jargon breakers.
I like that word. Thank you so very much. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, Nigel, last words.
Yeah, so as I just said, and I will say it again, I will contact all the people who wrote blogs for the competition, and thank you again for that. I will work with you if you are interested to, if we can, get as many of the entries as possible actually published on the Flow. As I said, there were some excellent entries, and it would be good to share that. I hope I can work with you and perhaps address some of the issues around training. And seriously, we would like to hear as many voices as possible. So if other people are interested, you don't have to worry about sending the perfect polished final blog. Please, if you're interested, get in touch, and it would be good to work with you to hear from as many of you as possible from across the project. So thank you all again.
Thank you so very much. So Kirk, so while Kirk gives a closing remarks, I want to inform everybody, look at the chat section. There should be a link to a very short survey. So if you want a certificate of participation from the webinar issued to you by Lancaster University Actuate/Recirculate Project, please click on the link, fill the very small survey of how you want your name to appear in your certificate of attendance. So please click on the link in the chat, fill the survey, and you will be sent your certificate of attendance from the project. I want to hand over to Kirk for his closing remarks, and we can call it a day. Over to you, Kirk.
Thanks very much, Akan. Can you hear me okay?
Very clearly, yes.
Excellent. So I'd just like to start by thanking all of the presenters for their wonderful presentations, extremely insightful. And as Nigel highlighted, there was a lot of commonality. I mean, maybe slightly different flavors or tones, but certainly a lot of commonality. And I think we all agree that communication, but also effective and appropriate communication using the right language is absolutely crucial to the success of any collaboration, of course, and that really does link to the success of the Recirculate project as well. I think that's absolutely crucial. I've really been, as I said in the chat somewhere up the list there, after these presentations, my head was actually buzzing with all of this information, and the variety and the enthusiasm by which people have really engaged with this workshop, this webinar. Not only in terms of the presentations, but also the chat that's going on, and indeed the engagement with the Mentimeter question and answers as well. It's been absolutely fantastic. So I just wanted to thank everyone for participating, and I think which has been one of the most successful webinars to date. Really do appreciate everybody's engagement here. So thank you very much. And of course, finally, thank you to Akan. Despite technical hitches, managed to sail through this in his usual. I'm using a different metaphor here, sailing rather than flying. Maybe you become a sailor, Akan. We can get you a captain's hat for a ship. Anyway, no, thank you, everyone. Wonderful. And it's great to see so many people involved. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed today. It was so good. And I think Keck is very correct. One of the very engaging ones. I'm seeing all these chats and all these comments and commentaries in the chat section, and it's just amazing to see. So don't forget to click on the link, fill in a small survey if you want a certificate of participation or attendance. But let me also inform you, 29th of March is the next webinar. And guess what the topic is? Show me the money. We are speaking about money for the next webinar. Guys, if you forget anything else, you better write that date on your diary. You can't afford to miss it. I'm not joking, guys. Seriously, ladies and gentlemen, the next webinar is March 29th and is focused on international funding. We would love to show you the money. Don't miss it and have an amazing week. Thanks, guys. Everybody. Bye-bye. You can unmute yourselves now and say hello. Fantastic.